Hi, it's that time of night for the Saints of Snowville, and we are now on Chapter 3. Now remember, if you like this video and you like the story, make sure you click like on the video, and also make sure you subscribe so you can get more cool stories like this. Let's get started. Elder John D. Jackson departed to labor in the Central States Mission in November of 1915. He would spend many glorious months tramping on the Louisiana bayous and roaming the Texas plains with men of stature, like S.O. Benyon, who presided over the Central States Mission for more than 25 years. Jack had never been further away from home than Salt Lake City. He had spent parts of 3 years at the Fielding Academy in Paris, Idaho, and 1 year at the Brigham Young College in Logan, where he played basketball. During the summer, he played baseball for the then Snowville town team. As a boy, he was well liked and considered by his elders to be a promising young man. Contrary to church teaching, he had drunk coffee many times when he went on the freight road or when he went to help hay on the BQ Ranch near Cokeville, Wyoming. He had also smoked Bull Durham a few times. Since the age of 14, he had an insatiable desire to see a girl in the nude. One Saturday in the summer of 1913, he had his chance. He had just spent 4 months at the Fielding Academy and was visiting in Ovid with Jim Cobb, a friend he had met at the academy. About 1.5 miles from Ovid was a deep hole in the Bear Lake Canal, used by girls from Montpelier for swimming. Jim Cobb had spied on the Montpelier girls before, and he knew where to go to watch. Jack and Jim positioned themselves in the bend in the canal, behind a big willow bush about 75 yards upstream from the swimming hole. They were up to their necks in the water, but could see directly into a little clearing on the bank about 20 feet away, where the girls changed into swimming suits. The dressing spot could not be seen from the swimming hole, nor from the path to it, but only from the canal and an area near the willow bush. When Jack and Jim were nearly blue from cold water, they heard the laughter of 6 girls. Jack knew only 2, but Jim knew all of them and had dated one. The girls took about 10 minutes to dress and walked around at least half the time stark naked, while John got a good look from all angles and concluded that anticipation was greater than reality. Female breasts were the greatest disappointment. Jack had supposed that they had protruded sharply, but in fact without support they hung down after the manner of a dog's ear. The lacteal appendages had a tubular appearance rather than a fullness. Jack concluded that the later illusion was created by a brassiere. The girls' rear ends appeared to sag, and the hips were much broader than Jack supposed. Some of the girls appeared to have no waists, but were squat, with a blending of the hips and breasts. "My lord, brassiere and panties does a lot for women," Jack said under his breath. When the girls were dressed and in the swimming hole, Jack and Jim started for a long route back to town. Jack said he had no desire to see any more nude women. He would rather leave something to the imagination. It would sure as hell take the intrigue out of sex if the women all around went without clothes, Jack mumbled several times on the way home. The experience made Jack a strong believer in the adage that a girl's greatest asset is a boy's imagination. When John received his call to the Central States Mission, he was 22 years old, 6 feet 3 inches tall, and weighed 190 pounds. He had a black beard, unless he shaved every day, and appeared to be at least 25. He had heard that the rough and tough boys made the best missionaries, but he had never been drunk and decided that perhaps he should have the interest of latter being a good missionary. 2 days after receiving his call on August 26, he went to Cokeville, Wyoming, where he got gloriously drunk, whipped 2 Larson boys, broke a large mirror over the bar, and spent a night in the city jail. The next morning he paid a $25 fine and another $25 to the bar owner and came back to Snowville, happy and better educated. John boarded the train for New Orleans and Montpelier, Idaho, November 18, 1915. He was to change trains in Denver and again in Dallas. As the train proceeded slowly through the wastelands of southern Wyoming, Jack thought of one last thing he wanted to do before he forsook worldly things and entered the ministry. He desired to talk to a real live whore. He had some desire to go to bed with a woman, but it was too late for that. He had already begun his missionary ministry anyway, and didn't think he wanted his first experience to be with a prostitute. Jack could not explain his desire for conversation, but as the train neared Denver, that desire became an obsession. Orson Perry of Snowville was 5 years older than Jack, and had been to Denver several times. He had told Jack more than once that there was at least 10 whorehouses in 3 blocks on Larimer Street. By the time the train arrived at Denver, J.D. resolved to find a whorehouse and talk to one of the girls. The train arrived in Denver at 5 p.m., and the Santa Fe to Dallas did not leave until 4 the next morning. After supper in a nearby cafe, Jack made his way to the Larimer Street, which was within walking distance of the depot. Elder Jackson walked south on Larimer Street for 2 or 7 blocks, then turned and started back north. When he saw the Stockman Hotel, it rang a bell. He remembered that Orson Perry had mentioned the hotel in his discussion of whores. The missionary paid $5 for a room, then sat in the hotel lobby and read a newspaper, and waited to see someone who might be a pimp. The desk clerk might be, but Jack wasn't sure. He didn't want to risk getting kicked out, so he waited. The little man emptied spittoons and worked as a bellhop, was probably a pimp, and Jack waited. About 8:30, Jack saw a cowboy having a serious conversation with a little man. The bellhop then went to the desk telephone. J.D. was sure this man was him. Elder Jackson asked the little man to come up to his room and help open a window that was stuck. The bellhop complained but followed. Once in room 320, Jack whirled on the little man and asked him if he could get a girl for the night. The bellhop, frightened shock, but after asking a few questions, said that he would see what he could do. "How much can you pay?" inquired the little man. "What will it cost?" Jack countered. "The cheapest will cost $7, but she can only stay an hour," replied the part-time pimp. "If you want one for all night, it will cost more." Jack said, "I want the youngest one that you can get for all night." The little man again seemed to concentrate, and finally he said, "A 19-year-old girl came in from Butte last night, but that's going to cost you $25. "That's all right," said Jack. "But tell me how you divide the money." "That's none of your goddamn business," snapped the procurer. Jack had heard that the fee was divided several ways, and that the girl got the short end. As he took the $25, the pimp left his instructions. "Leave the door open. She'll walk in without knocking. When she's in, lock the door, and don't open it until she's here. And don't open it as long as she's here. Have her out of the room by 7:30. The little man was pleased with the deal and volunteered one more caution. "The police go to work at 8, so you don't need to worry until morning. Those lazy bastards only come around once a month and never start to do anything until they have had coffee and read the funnies." Jack stretched out on the bed after the pimp, whose name he never learned, left. About 45 minutes, the door opened softly. A young woman slipped in. She carefully locked and chained the door before Jack could get off the bed. For the first time since Jack had conceived this idea, he had misgivings and was a little scared. He tried, however, not to show it. "I'm J.D. Jackson from Idaho," the missionary volunteered. "My name is Louise," said the girl. She wore no coat or scarf. If she had come from outside the hotel, she had left her wraps elsewhere. "I'm sorry I can't offer you a drink," Jack apologized. "I got in town late and didn't think about it." "Makes no difference," said Louise. "I don't drink much when I work anyway." Jack studied the girl carefully before he said any more. She was more nearly 24 than 19, but she was pretty and quiet. Louise was about 5 foot 6 inches tall and weighed about 115 pounds. She was slightly flat-chested, but that didn't matter. Jack was a leg man rather than a teat man, and her legs were long and slender. In the never-ending discussion of female anatomy that goes on among men, Jack had exposed the leg cause and consistently pointed out why the legs were more important. Jim Cobb, Jared Perry, and the majority of the boys Jack knew were confirmed teat men, but all agreed that a girl's face was only of secondary consideration. "You rarely see a woman's face in bed," Orson Perry had reasoned. And in any event, all cats are gray in the dark. Louise did have a rather pretty heart-shaped face. She had a slender, straight nose and brown eyes. She had slightly bucked teeth, but this only enhanced their sparkle and evenness. Her nostrils were slightly flared, like that of a young filly who had recently been chased by a stud. The girl was beginning to get a little nervous as Jack continued to stare at her without speaking. She said, "What's the matter with you? Have you ever had a woman before?" J.D. didn't answer. At length he said, "Sit down and let's talk." Louise shrugged uneasily and sat in the chair near the door. "I don't want to go to bed with you. I just want to talk with you about an hour. Then you are free to go," Jack said. Louise looked at him in disbelief. "What are you, one of those damned queers?" "No," said Jack, "just curious." "Well," said the girl as she fidgeted in her chair, "it's your money, but don't get any funny ideas." "Just talk to me for a while and nothing will happen," replied the missionary. "How old are you?" was the first question. 25. "How long have you been in the business?" 7 years. Louise was born in Glendive, Montana. Her mother was dead and her father worked as a copper mines at Butte. She had her first affair with a man when she was 16. Took pay for the first time when she was 18, $1. She was arrested for being in a drummer's room when she was almost 19 and had to leave Glendive for Helena. She had been to Billings, Casper, Butte, Ogden, and Rock Springs, and had landed in Denver for the first time about 3 months ago. She would stay there 7 or 8 months, then move on. "Do you like your work?" Jack inquired. "First I did," she replied, "but now I hate it. The men I see are brutal, stinking, and cheap." "Why don't you get out of it?" "I will someday. I have $10,000 in a bank in Billings, and when I get 10 more, I'm through." "How long will that take?" "Less than 5 years when I quit this dirty business. I will go back to Montana, marry a cowboy, and have some babies," she volunteered. She talked freely now and appeared to trust Jack. The missionary inquired about her religion, future plans, and people she associated with. He expressed some sympathy, but she wanted none of that and cut him off short. Jack said, "I guess that's all. You can leave now." He handed her 20 silver dollars as a tip. Louise put the cartwheels in her purse and said, "After you've been so nice, I shouldn't take it, but it will let me retire 2 days sooner. I won't have to give any of this to that goddamn pimple-faced pimp." She started to leave, then turned. "Could I ask you a few questions?" "No," said Jack. "I paid you to answer questions, not to ask them." She sat down again and said, "Now I'm real curious. What did you think I wanted?" "I thought you might be a queer," she replied. "One of those fellows ripped all my clothes off and beat me up once, but that's all he wanted. Afterwards, I thought you might want to preach to me about how to try to reform me. Has anyone ever preached to you?" "One time an old bald fellow lectured me for more than an hour about the evils of prostitution. He was a widowed minister. He preached, wept, preached, then went to bed with me. 'Tell me,' she said, 'didn't I appeal to you?' "It's not that," said Jack. "I wouldn't go to bed tonight with any woman. I just wanted some conversation, and you have been just great." "Don't you want me to take off my clothes, or at least kiss me?" she asked. "No," said Jack pleasantly. "I have received more than my money's worth." She rose slowly and walked towards him, her eyes moist. She said, "You're a strange one." She kissed him lightly on the cheek and was gone. The elder lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling a long time. He had spent $50 on the room and the girl. The $50 was part of the money he had received in contributions from the saints the night of his farewell party a week before in Snowville. Probably never before, he mused, in the history of this church, have church contributions been spent in a whorehouse. What a chance to take. If it were reported that a whore left his hotel room at 12 midnight, he would be dishonorably discharged as a missionary, excommunicated from the church, and disgraced in Snowville for life. It wouldn't make no difference that he had done nothing but talk. No one would believe him. In the eyes of the church or civil courts, an adultery case could be proven. To prove adultery in either a church or civil court, only two elements of proof were necessary: that a person had the inclination and the opportunity. A bishop or civil judge would take note of the fact that all men have an inclination, and being alone in a room for 2 hours with a whore is certainly adequate opportunity. At 3 a.m., Jack left the Stockman Hotel to catch the Santa Fe for Dallas and New Orleans. He had no sleep in the hotel, but a lot of education. 40 years later, he remembered his $50 as the best money he had ever spent. As Elder Jackson walked to the depot, he thought about seeing naked girls, being gloriously drunk, and conversing for more than 2 hours with a whore. He felt cleansed and purged of carnal passions and appetites, and now felt he could put aside things of the flesh and proceed with his ministry, unencumbered but unsatisfied passions, appetites, and burning curiosity. And that will do it for Chapter 3 of the Saints of Snowville. Now, if you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and make sure you subscribe so you can hear more of the story. Have a great day.